Hello, students. I welcome all of you again on this platform of online teaching. As you know, today we will focus on the topic marriage as a major theme of the novel Emma. In fact, it is part 2 of this topic. Part 1 of this topic I have already delivered through my lecture in your previous class. This is for the kind information of the students who missed my previous lecture. So let me resume the topic matrimony as a major theme of the novel Emma. Apart from Emma, Jane Austen has written some other novels also, like Pride and Prejudice, Sense and Sensibility, and Persuasion, etc. Emma is regarded to be the best novel of Jane Austen. Undoubtedly, Emma is a work of art from the beginning to the end. This novel has artistic coherence, beauty, finish, and form. It succeeds without having sensational sentiments and supernatural incidents or events. That is why Dr. F.R. Lewis says that the work of Jane Austen has the normal reality. Love and marriage is the major theme in Emma and other novels of Jane Austen. But love is not of the violent or terrible kind in the novels of Jane Austen, as we find in Swinburne or in the novels of Hardy. Besides, love in the novels of the novelist is not of the illicit kind. Love in the novels of Jane Austen terminates in marriage and happiness. Jane Austen believes in marriage and social sanctity. She cannot permit love without marriage. That is why the novels of Jane Austen are called the, the games of matrimony. Mrs. Weston perceives Mr. Knightley showing some interest in Jane Fairfax, and she communicates her feeling to Emma, saying that Mr. Knightley and Jane might get married. This possibility greatly disturbs Emma's mind. Emma would certainly not like a marriage between Mr. Knightley and Jane because the children of Emma's sister Isabel would then be cut off from Donwell Abbey. But we can see that Emma's opposition to this marriage proceeds from a feeling of unconscious jealousy. She cannot tolerate that Jane Fairfax should become the mistress of Donwell Abbey. Soon afterwards, however, Mr. Knightley disabuses Emma's mind of this suspicion. He tells Emma that Jane Fairfax is a very charming young woman, but that he had never thought of her as a possible wife for himself. She has not the open temper which a man would wish for in a wife, says Mr. Knightley, thus setting Emma's fears at rest. Emma is now mentally busy planning a marriage between Harriet and Frank. For Harriet, it would be advantageous and delightful indeed, says Emma to herself. Before any further development takes place in this connection, however, Mr. Elton gets married, and the novelist devotes one whole long chapter to an account of this marriage and people's reactions to it. Emma forms a very unfavorable opinion of Mrs. Elton and thinks her to be an insufferable woman. Mr. Elton is, however, immensely pleased with his wife as she is immensely pleased with him. In other words, theirs is a perfectly happy marriage, each being thoroughly suited to the other. Mr. Knightley, however, agrees with Emma that Mrs. Elton is a vulgar kind of woman and that Harriet would have made a far more suitable wife for the vicar. Emma's hope of seeing Harriet married to Frank receives some encouragement when Frank happens to rescue Harriet from some gypsies. An imaginist as Emma is, this incident gives rise to extravagant speculation in her mind about the romantic possibilities between Frank and Harriet. But this time again, Emma's marriage plan about Harriet ends in disaster when the secret engagement of Frank and Jane comes to light. Once again, Emma receives a great setback and a great shock. Once again, she has been duped by her own fancies, but this time the man whom Emma had chosen for Harriet proves to have been guilty of abominable conduct, and Emma gives vent to her resentment in strong terms in her talk with Mrs. Weston. But this is not the end of surprises and humiliations for Emma in her matchmaking ventures. While trying to comfort Harriet over the news of Frank's being already secretly engaged to another woman, Emma learns from Harriet that the latter has been in love not with Frank but with Mr. Knightley. This is yet another shock for Emma, who now immediately becomes conscious of her own love for Mr. Knightley and who decides that Mr. Knightley must marry no one except herself. Thus begins a new scheme in Emma's mind with regard to marriage, but this time the scheme pertains to herself. In her own case, at least Emma is not mistaken. When Mr. Knightley learns from her that she was never in love with Frank, he tells her, to her great joy and delight, that he himself has all along been in love with her. The only difficulty in the way of their marriage is the opposition of Emma's father and Emma's reluctance to leave her father alone. This difficulty is, however, soon overcome by Mr. Knightley's offer to take up residence at Hartfield after his marriage to Emma. Meanwhile, Harriet, on a visit to Isabel in London, happens to meet Robert Martin, who had been sent thither by Mr. Knightley on an errand, and Robert Martin renews his proposal of marriage to her. This time there is no reason for Harriet to refuse, and so the marriage of Harriet and Robert Martin is decided upon. Frank's rich aunt, Mrs. Churchill, having died, and Frank having taken his uncle into confidence about his desire to marry Jane, Frank receives his uncle's consent, and so the marriage of these two is also decided upon. In this way, the novel, which opens with the marriage of Miss Taylor and Mr. Weston, ends with three other marriages. It is felt by some readers that Jane's marriage to Frank is somewhat unconvincing. How could a girl like Jane fall in love with and marry a man like Frank? Yes, the thing is really improbable, but perhaps the author wanted to emphasize the helplessness of women in the society of her time. An intelligent girl having no means of livelihood except taking up the job of a governess would be compelled even to marry a man like Frank who could assure her of a respectable life. In the case of Harriet's marriage to Robert, it is not probability that can be questioned, but this marriage is presented in a way which to some extent sentimentalizes the whole affair. Emma is allowed too easy a way out of her problem, and the emotional force of the situation is thereby somewhat weakened. The objection to too conventional, a sense of happy ending, is not that it is happy, but that it is conventional and so lulls our feeling into accepting it too easily. It must, however, be reiterated that marriage as a theme in this novel is subordinate to the central purpose of the book, which is to describe the development of the character of the heroine, while the development of Emma's character is demonstrated largely in relation in marriage, largely in relation to marriage as an important relationship in human life. We cannot ignore the fact that certain other aspects of Emma's character have also been brought into prominence. For instance, Emma progresses from a proud girl to one who is mentally more balanced, from a callous girl to one who has become sympathetic, from a girl of rash and hasty judgment to one who has become sober and mature. Emma is about marriage. It begins with one marriage, that of Miss Taylor, ends with three more, and considers two others by the way. The subject is marriage, but not marriage in the abstract. There is nothing of the moral fable here. Indeed, it is impossible to conceive of the subject except in its concrete expression, which is the plot. If it is not quite adequate to say that Emma is about marriage, it is also not adequate to say it is about the heroine. The concrete, the concrete quality of the book, that is why, has to be emphasized. We have no basic doubts about this book. It is there, a living organism, and it survives in the vibrations of its own being. It lives with the inevitable interlocking logic of life itself. No part of it is separable from any other part. Even those episodes of the plot which seem at first mere contrivances to arouse a little suspense and keep the story going, such as the mystery of the pianoforte, Jane's letters at the post office, the confusion as to whether Harriet referred to Mr. Knightley or to Frank Churchill. Such passages all have a more important purpose. They reveal character or they fail to reveal it. This latter function is subtle and important. The more complex characters in the book, like people in real life, reveal themselves gradually and not without surprise. It would be no exaggeration to say that this novel is as convincing as our own lives and has the same kind of concreteness. Jane Austen is fascinated by the complexities of personal relationship. Marriage in Emma is thought of entirely in terms of actual and particular personal relationship. In reading this novel, we really enrich our experience. The real object of marriage according to Jane Austen, is companionship, an intellectual and emotional association between husband and wife. According to Jane Austen, it is wrong to marry for money, but it is silly to marry without it. Okay, everyone, that's all for now. Thank you.